Welcome to the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Join us each week as we sit down with the founder of Alchemy Wealth Management and author of Your Fiscal Physical, Ryan Nelson. Tune in to gain valuable insights and practical tips as we simplify complex financial concepts into digestible lessons. From budgeting to retirement planning, this podcast is your go-to resource for mastering financial literacy.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Fiscal Physical Podcast. My name is Aaron. I'm joined by Ryan, the sage, wise, financial connoisseur, guru, whatever we want to call him, founder of Alchemy Wealth Management. How are you today, Ryan?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How'd you like those titles?
I like sage. I like
sage. Yeah. That's a good word. Like, you throw out sage, you're like, huh, cool.
I don't even know exactly what it means, but I like it.
I don't know, but people burn it too. So it's like it's like a plant and I guess it's a adjective if you want to say too. So anyway, we're going to talk today about something that is pretty prevalent, I would say, in the United States specifically. We're going to talk about student loans today. So if you guys have student loans, you're listening to this podcast, maybe you're thinking about going back to school, going to school for the first time, potentially this could be insightful for you just to kind of gain some literacy or some knowledge based on student loans overall. But Ryan, I'll go ahead and kind of turn it over to you to think of just how you want to approach this, talk about how they might, what they are, two different types, and all that good stuff here.
So real quick, the definition of sage is a profoundly wise man, especially one who features in ancient history or legend.
Well, I was 50-50 on that.
Yeah, I like it.
That's pretty good.
Student loans. So, they're super prevalent, right? Whenever we talk about debt with clients, I always say there's 5 main types of loans. There's mortgages, there's car payments, there's credit card debt, there's medical debt, and that 5th one is student loans. Mm-hmm. So they're very, very prevalent. Lots of people have student loans. Some of them seemingly crippling amounts, right? And some
scary amounts.
Not too big of a deal. And so, I think there's certainly some actions to take to make sure that you can maybe still have your student loans or maybe not have any student loans and plan for an appropriate retirement. So a couple of things I would say is to plan ahead. So if you're the parent of a child that you want to encourage to go to school, start thinking about it ahead of time. Is there an opportunity to start saving for your kid's education, either in a brokerage account or a 529 account, or do prepaid tuition or something like that? And planning ahead can really, I use an example in the book. It's about 2 different individuals. One planned ahead for retirement or for education costs, and one financed the education costs. And if you think about it, the person who's planning ahead, so let's say they start saving, for this example, they start saving 5 years before the kid goes to college. Well, they get to take advantage of interest. So they collect interest over those 5 years, right? So they again take advantage of interest. They are the beneficiary of interest over those 5 years. If instead you take the loan and you pay it off over the next 5 years, you're now paying interest into the bank, right? It's detrimental. So in either case, interest is coming into play. One, you're benefiting from it and it's growing the amount you have to spend on something. One, it's a detriment and you're having to pay more for the same thing, right? And that can be a big deal. I know for the example I used in the book, the cost ended up being effectively double, right? So buying something ahead of time, or the example I used in the book, it might have been buying a car. I can't remember now off the top of my head, but either way, the theory is the same. And saving for this big, large purchase, 5, 10, 15 years in advance, and then buying it and taking advantage of the compound means that you might have put, half as much capital towards it as if you make the purchase and then pay, with the negative effects of interest moving forward. So just planning ahead is a very useful tool.
Yeah, I think that applies to a lot of, honestly, in life in general, planning ahead, and especially when it comes to the financial stuff and retirement overall. You think if you, and when you're making a big purchase like this, or potentially going to be taking out a big loan or doing something that's really expensive, if you can plan for it, because there's going to be things that come up and you have to adjust and such too. But if you have a good plan, at least of how you're going to attack it versus kind of just doing it, you're much more likely to be able to, it doesn't cripple your life, if you will.
Yep. The other thing I would say is, what if, this is sort of thinking ahead as well. But and this is hard, right? For like an 18-year-old kid who's going into college. It's hard to know what you want to do, right? I know I didn't. And I've now, I got my undergrad in mechanical engineering. I'm not practicing engineering. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do at that stage in my life. And so this is hard, right? But not all the cost of schools varies drastically.
Oh yeah,
very drastically. We're talking being able to graduate, with say some of the cheapest schools are $15,000. Some of the most expensive schools are like $400,000, right? That's a really, really, really big difference. And even if we just compared, say, $40,000 to $400,000, is the $400,000 school? It's 10 times the cost. Is it 10 times the education? Like, is your earning potential 10 times higher? Is it 10 times more fun? Is it 10? Like, what are you trying to solve from this experience? Are you trying to, mature? Are you trying to have fun? Are you trying to increase earning potential? What are you trying to solve? And is the cost of that school actually worth it? Right. And again, this is hard for an 18-year-old, but obviously, hopefully their parents would be able to help walk them through this. And another thing would be, do you need to go straight to the private, university, or could you benefit from either graduating completely from a community college or starting and doing 2 years at a community college if you don't know what you want to do, right? Or a tech school,
tech school,
or a trade school, or even just your local state school compared to a private school, right? And so again, those costs vary very drastically, and I would be very hard pressed to say that, an education that costs 10 times as much is going to leave you with 10 times as much earning potential. I think most of us realize that after you kind of get that first job and second job and third job, like your experience and stuff is much more meaningful than, what the diploma says from your education a decade or 2 decades ago.
Absolutely.
Right? And most people are going to reach their, peak earning years in their 50s and 60s. And so you think, when somebody's hiring a 60-year-old for a new role, do they care so much about where they went to school 45 years ago? Or do they care more about, what their last role was and what their most recent expertise is, right? So that'd be something to think about. And one of the examples I like to use is, I think an example that a lot of people can relate to is buying a car. Everybody, whether or not they do this or not, everybody sort of knows in the back of their head, buying a new car is not a good financial decision. It appreciates or depreciates a lot, right? When you drive it off the lot.
Sure.
Like everybody, like quote unquote, should probably buy a used car, right? Everybody like intuitively knows that. And at the end of the day, you're buying the car to get you from your house to work, from, work to the grocery store, from the grocery store to the gym and back to the house, right? And the used car can get you there just as efficiently and just as effectively as the new car, but for maybe half the cost or something, right?
Absolutely.
And so you apply this to the colleges too. And it's like, are you paying a 10x premium just to have a flashy name? Like, are you accomplishing the same thing as maybe your local state university or a community college, and you're paying 10 times the cost or more just to have that like flashy name on your diploma? And then again, is that worth it? And I guess it depends on what you're trying to solve for. But I do think too many people just sort of blindly both push their kids, and the kids then therefore just kind of blindly follow and just end up in college with there was no real true meaning or thought or planning around it. It's just like you just happen to land in college, you're just kind of going through the motions, and then you graduate. Kids don't even know what $400,000 of loan means.
Right, yeah.
And then they graduate, they get a job, maybe even a good job paying them $100,000 a year, but still that's a burden. That's an entire mortgage, right? Basically that they have to still pay back. And then if they want to buy a house, now they have 2 mortgages.
Yep, exactly.
So I think, just putting some like intentional thought around what you're trying to achieve and the costs associated with these different universities probably is honestly like the most meaningful. And again, depending on what you're trying to accomplish and what degree you're doing, maybe the university that's 10 times as expensive does make sense for you. But as long as you put that intentional thought in ahead of time, I think it could make more sense there.
Oh, no doubt, man. I think that you hit right on the idea of like at 18 years old, like,
right.
What do you want to do? Like, and can you do that somewhere that's maybe cheaper than like maybe an Ivy League school? Now, if you get into an Ivy League school, maybe you have some financial help behind you, whatever it is. I think that there's opportunity, and there's only a small handful of people who can say they went to Stanford.
Yeah.
Like, that's great. But, like you said, like 15 years later, no one cares that I went to the University of Idaho versus like, Penn.
Right.
Like, it's like, all right, well, cool. Like, but maybe you build those connections, something like that. There's always pros and cons with everything too. But I think it's you put it incredibly eloquently of like, what do you want to do at 18?
Sure.
I don't think a lot of people that 18 are still doing what they are doing, 17 years later, even, for example.
Another interesting thought experiment would be like, if you go think about all the professionals in your life that you work with, how many of them, like, just the professionals, not your personal friends or anything, but like the professionals, your doctor, whatever, your attorney, right? How many of them do you actually know what school they even went to?
Very few.
So it's clearly clearly not meaningful in your evaluation on whether or not to hire that person. So, then, so it's just something to think about. The other thing I would say is, working through school or extending your school, maybe not taking the traditional 4-year path and spending 6 years to graduate school and working full-time throughout the process or whatever. Obviously, that can help avoid student loans. Again, whether or not that's the experience you want for yourself or your children, that's another question. But again, if simply our question is how to reduce student loans, that would certainly be a tool. And then if we are going to get student loans, there's both federal student loans and private student loans, and it would be worth evaluating the differences between the two. There's certainly some pros and cons. And, you might have heard some things in the news, like over the last few years about, maybe loans getting forgiven or, people not having to pay on their loans. That's primarily federal student loans. If you borrowed money from me to go to school, I'm going to expect to be paid back.
Right, yeah. Right? Come hell or high water, Ryan's getting paid back.
But so there's definitely some difference between private and federal student loans, and you might want to, again, just do some due diligence, looking into all the different pros and cons of the different types of loans as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a good piece of to know what the difference between those federal and the private ones are, because I know if you've ever filed, I think it's FAFSA, it's free application for federal student aid. It gives you like the federal options, and it also says, hey, you can explore private loans as well too. And one of my friends, actually, Bobby. His name's Bobby. He's from Maine originally, and he did a like a 5.5 year program with with school. Didn't really work full time either. He just pretty much went to school, and I remember him telling me about just like the his first semester coming out of college or high school. He had some scholarships and stuff. He really didn't have to pay, had some savings, didn't have to pay very much. Then he got to the end of his first semester. He's like, wait, how do I pay for the second one? And I think it's just that like that knowledge or lack of knowledge that
right.
And before you know it, he did 5.5 years at this university, and he ended up with like $100,000 in student loans for a political science and a minor in Spanish.
Sure.
And you're like, oh my God, like that is on paper, that's just incredibly, it makes me sweat thinking about that, about like having to pay these things back. But just and he has some private ones, some federal ones and such too, but just knowing the difference between the two and knowing what works best for you and how you're going to pay these things back like is something you might not think about it, 20 years old. Like, but when it comes time, it's like, those things are going to be due.
Yeah, absolutely.
But awesome. Well, that's great. Anything else you want to touch on here, Ryan? Or you feel like we covered it pretty well?
No, I think it sounds good to me.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'll just leave you guys with this. We've said it a couple of times. Just make sure you do your due diligence. There's a lot of resources out there right now that you can take advantage of that maybe weren't around, 15, 17 years ago. Make sure if you're going to do these things, it might be right for you. We're not going to say one way or the other, but just make sure you're aware of what you're getting into for sure, and make sure it jives with what you're looking to do in your future for sure. So, awesome. Well, everybody hang tight. We'll be right back.
And now, to put the personal in personal finance.
Welcome back to this side of the Fiscal Physical podcast. I am still here with Ryan. And Ryan, I got another question for you here. I'm going to pose it to our listeners, too, to kind of think about this. But what's a quality in others that you really admire, but maybe might find hard to cultivate in yourself?
Yeah, I think humility is often, I think like somebody who's like humbly confident,
Sure.
And if you're having like a conversation, if you're in a group or something and you're having a conversation and, maybe, they're like a subject matter expert on something or something, and somebody else just something wrong. And it's like, they're just confident enough and humble enough just to say, no worries. Like, I don't need to correct that person.
Sure, yeah.
You know, I mean, there's, you know, at times I can correct them if it's something important that needs correcting, but also at the same time, it's just fine, confident enough in themselves that they can just let it go and don't need to prove anything to anybody. And I think that's a cool quality that maybe not lots, but that some people have.
Some people, that's an excellent. When you said humility, I was like, because in my mind, like, at least in, maybe I have a jaded point of view, but I find you pretty humble, like, just in general, like, about, like, if you ask, like, oh, how's it going or whatever, like, I feel like a lot of times you like to ask questions to other people, like, you like, like, turn it back, no, I'm doing well, how are you? Like, it kind of gets back to the other person pretty quickly, and maybe with, like, successes or failures or whatever, it's like being able to, like, talk about those things equally, I feel like is, like, a big piece of, like, what I respect about people too. And so but I would say, like, just I don't know the definition of humility, but I think the way you put it, of, like, I have that exact same thing. If somebody says something that's just, I'm like, no, I know that's not right. It's very hard. I like my eye kind of starts twitching about, like, but at the same, as I've gotten older and maybe gotten more patience or whatever, like, I'm just like, is this really important for me to butt in here? And like, I don't know, like, let this, but when it gets to be egregious, I'm like, all right, I got to leave, or like, kind of thing. But it's an interesting one that you put there. And I'm going to go a different direction with this too. I find, like, people who are artistically creative are incredibly, like, intriguing to me. I think it's so awesome, people who can just, like, sit down and draw a picture of something and have it be, like, legible or whatever. Like, I can barely write my own name. Like, my handwriting's so terrible. And I mean, somebody was like, hey, draw a picture of a watermelon. I'm like, I don't know. I couldn't do that. Like,
or somebody with, like, perfect pitch or something. It's incredible. What, you know, I've seen some videos of people who, like, I mean, they can match a pitch perfectly, and then, you know, they can think about how, like, a song would sound in a different pitch without even having to hear it. They just have that ability, which, you know, I don't know if it's a learned ability and an innate ability, but either way, I haven't either learned it or didn't get it.
It's not innate, and I haven't learned it.
But definitely, I think a lot of that stuff is really cool.
Yeah, I think the creativity piece of it, especially artistically, and whatever you want to call what an artistic thing is, but it's something that I don't have, and but I think it's really cool when people do. I'm like, that's awesome. You guys don't know how cool that is, because that's something I practice penmanship, but I never really got any better. With it. But awesome. Well, thanks, Ryan. As always, appreciate it. Appreciate all the listeners out there. We'll be back next week. These podcasts drop every Tuesday morning, so set your calendar to that. And we appreciate the listeners. And Ryan, go ahead and play us out here.
As always, stay the course.
Thank you for joining us for the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Until next time, happy listening. And as always, stay the course. If you have a question or topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@alchemywealth.com. If you enjoyed today's discussion, subscribe to the podcast to ensure you never miss an episode. And consider leaving us a rating and review on your favorite platform. This helps other listeners like you find the show. For more resources, you can visit Alchemy Wealth Management's website at www.alchemywealth.com or find your Fiscal Physical, the book, on Amazon. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention that personal finance is just that, personal. Please don't take anything we say as advice. The preceding content is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It's not an offer or a solicitation, nor should it be construed or relied upon for tax, legal, or investment advice. It doesn't consider your personal financial situation or objectives and may not be suitable for you.